in early 2007, George Ryan Ross III was on top of the world. After his band Panic at the Disco got a real lucky break 2 years earlier after being discovered and signed by Fall Out Boy's Pete Wentz after only just forming their band and putting up only a few sort of electroacoustic rough demos onto Pure Volume. The luck continued as their very first record, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, became an unexpected overnight success in the mainstream music world at the time. The album's lead single, I Write Sins Not Tragedies, became a top 40 radio hit, and their music videos were in heavy rotation on MTV. They landed themselves on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. Their album was certified platinum with sales of 1 million copies sold by the end of 2006. Now, guitarist Ryan Ross, he was also the primary songwriter at the time, and his brothers in rock, Brendan, Spencer, and recently joined bassist John Walker, better known to the world at the time as Panic at the Disco, had accomplished all of their dreams and then some. And, you know, in early 2007, as the touring cycle for A Fever You Can't Sweat Out had wrapped up, the band naturally decided to take some time off of touring in the first half of the year to begin writing their second record. Now, it's stressful for any band to write a second record, the sophomore album. You know, usually when a band, you know, kind of gets the wheels of their career turning on their debut, there are now a long list of new pressures that the band must face, like expectations from fans and expectations from their record label when going into making a follow-up second record. In a lot of ways, you could even go as far as saying sometimes a band's whole career is reliant on the second record doing well in order to keep their career moving forward and avoid the dreaded sophomore slump. And Ryan Ross and his band were under arguably more pressure than any band in the scene that they were in was at the time to make a great second record, considering they now had to follow up a debut which was a surprise overnight platinum selling success. And let's keep in mind, in 2007, when the band were about to lay down their sophomore release, they were still insanely young. Ryan was 21, Spencer was only 19, John Walker was 22, and singer Brendan was just turning 20. That's crazy. Half of the band couldn't even legally buy alcohol yet, and they were faced with the pressures of having to follow up an insanely successful platinum debut record. You know, theoretically, that would drive anyone in that situation absolutely mad, but more on going mad later. Also, guys, before we get into it, I do want to say a couple things. For one thing, I never usually talk about stuff like this in my videos, but if you are subscribed to me, please do me a favor and hit the notification bell, turn the notifications on. I looked at my YouTube analytics recently, and apparently only like 10% of my subscribers have their notifications on, so that means that a lot of you are probably missing out on when I put out new stuff. So if you want to stay in the loop, hit that notification bell so you will be reminded. Also, huge shout out and thank you to all of my patrons, everyone who supports me on Patreon. You know, it's real tough to pay the bills with YouTube alone, so any financial support on Patreon really helps me be able to keep making videos at the pace that I want to, and there's, you know, fun bonus content that I put up on there. There's a chance for me to do a video review of your band, so check out the tiers. The link is in the description, and thanks to everyone who's already signed up for that. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back into the Panic at the Disco Pretty Odd era. So, our story of the creation of Panic at the Disco's second record begins in March of 2007 in an attempt to get away from the hustle and bustle and distractions of the outside world. The four Panic Boys holed up in a rented cabin in the middle of the mountains of their home state of Nevada, essentially isolating themselves together in the middle of the woods away from everybody with the intention of laser focusing on writing their next record. During this session, which lasted lasted from March until July of 2007. An alleged total of 7 songs had been written for their next record, which was, at the time, tentatively titled Cricket and Clover. Now, 5 of these 7 songs have never seen the light of day, even in demo form. No one has heard them. Those songs are apparently titled the following. There Was Once a Man from Nantucket. There's one called Fill Me Up. There's one called Porridge. There's one called I Don't Have a Shirt, But I've Got a Hat. And there's a song called It's True Love. The 2 other songs that they made during this time did end up surfacing on later albums. Folkin' Around appeared on 2008's Pretty Odd, and Nearly Witches later appeared on 2011's Vices and Virtues. Those were both apparently also Cricket and Clover intended songs. However, this second album which they were working on, Cricket and Clover, also sometimes referred to as the Cabin album, eventually ended up just getting scrapped as a whole. Now, much like Weezer's Songs from the Black Hole or the Beach Boys' Smile, Cricket and Clover is, added to the list of many mythical, unreleased, or scrapped rock albums throughout history. So there were many different reasons why the Panic at the Disco Cricket and Clover album never saw completion, which funnily enough are oddly kind of similar to the reasons why Smile by the Beach Boys were never finished. For one thing, after completing such a musically outside the box and kind of experimental debut record, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, the band, who were at that point starting to grow kind of a distaste for the Warped Tour, emo, pop-punk world in which they came from and had kind of been affiliated with up until that point, they wanted to break away from that. They wanted to continue down the experimental path, but they were trying to attack it in ways that were almost too grandiose and gaudy for them to actually complete without totally losing their minds and killing each other in the process. Apparently, get this, the band were trying to make this Cricket and Clover album into a, quote, modern fairy tale, which took place in a mixed reality, according to Ryan, a, quote, strange place, which he was trying to figure out. There were going to be fictional characters. It was apparently going to be a, quote, Disney-styled fairy tale concept album with a whole plot line, which would run consecutively from song to song. The band were apparently super inspired by, composers like Danny Elfman, and they wanted to make it super cinematic, almost more of like a film score or a musical, as opposed to like a rock album. Apparently there's actually almost no rock influence on the whole thing, no choruses. Apparently the songs were largely instrumental. The producer that they were working with, Rob Mathis, said that the song structures were really bizarre. The band also, get this, apparently almost didn't even want to use real instruments somehow, and drummer Spencer Smith wanted to build somewhat of a MacGyver-esque drum kit out of random items like milk crates and boxes and glass bottles. Now, obviously, this idea for this Cricket and Clover album sounds like absolutely an epic idea, am I right? And I hope the unheard demos from this album do see the light of day at some point, because there is no band that I think could tackle as crazy of an idea for an album like this other than Panic at the Disco at the time during the Ryan Ross era. I'm sure it would have been epic, but obviously, like I said, it just ended up being way too ambitious and larger than life of an idea for a band to realistically achieve. The label probably wanted an album done sooner rather than later, and Cricket and Clover sounds like something you'd have to spend like 10 years of your life completing. Not to mention, unlike the A Fever You Can't Sweat Out era, where the band members, didn't drink alcohol or, they didn't use any illicit mind-altering substances during that time. They were pretty straight edge from what I know. It was during their stay in the cabin in early 2007 when the band decided to experiment with entering alternate spaces of consciousness, if you know what I mean. Drugs. They were doing drugs. Brendan Urie once said, quote, "Oh, we were just on mushrooms the whole time. When we were writing for the second album, we locked ourselves away in a cabin for about 3 months. We had this idea to do like a musical. The music ended up being way too ambitious and we were all fighting so much. This was kind of the beginning of the end. We were trying to do this whole thing and it didn't work out at all. Spencer and Ryan had never drank, never done drugs, so this was like their college experience. So we were all raging so hard for that album. I think we were doing it to cope with each other too, because we had lived with each other basically every day for like 3 years. We were just tired, so we were like, let's go live together in a cabin and take psychedelics because that'll help, I guess. There you go. The band began playing some one-off shows, mostly festival dates in the summer of '07, their first shows since wrapping up the A Fever You Can't Sweat Out touring cycle. During these shows, they were debuting a new song live, which was the song called It's True Love from the Cabin album. Like I said, this is one of the songs where an actual demo of it doesn't exist, but there are clips, cell phone clips from the crowd of them playing it live in the summer of '07. So here's a clip of them playing it. Check it out. True love is so it definitely, to me, sounds like a freaking fairy tale on acid, which is, I'm assuming, exactly what they were going for on the Cricket and Clover album. It is, however, definitely very esoteric and unique, let's say, very outside of the box sounding, you know? There's something, I don't know about you guys, but to me there's something almost like unsettling about this song. Not in the sense that I dislike it, I think it's a really beautiful song, but there's like a real haunting vibe about it. The melodies give me like a nervous feeling in the pit of my stomach, you know what I mean? Either way, come fall of 2007, the band went back to the drawing board, scrapped Cricket and Clover, and they basically decided to start over and do the exact opposite of what they were trying to do for Cricket and Clover. And now they were going to make an album that was way more simple, way more stress-free, and ultimately way more positive. Just chill out and write some good songs. No big, gaudy, grandiose concept, you know? Now, an article published on MTV.com on August 6th of 2007, which was titled, "Panic at the Disco Try a Different Tack for New LP. Simplicity." This article paints a pretty good picture of the new direction in which the band were taking for their second record. When Ryan Ross was asked about the new song, which they had been playing live, It's True Love, he said the following, quote, "We hadn't played a show in a while and we wanted to play something new, but that song's probably not even going to make the record at this point. We've changed a lot of what we want to do with the record, and I feel like we're happier with the new songs we have so far than we ever were with any of the old songs on the last record." Bassist John Walker also chimed in with some insight as well, saying, quote, "We wrote a bunch of songs that we were happy with and we liked them a lot, but we just weren't having as much fun as we should have been, you know? Things are pretty good for us right now and we're pretty happy, and I think that this is going to come out more in these songs. We spent the past year and a half playing a bunch of songs that have weird melodies and weirder phrasings and long words that Brendan Urie still can't pronounce all that well. We're just trying to write songs that we have fun playing." Ryan Ross also said, quote, "We wanted to approach these songs in the most basic form. We wrote them all on one acoustic guitar with someone singing. I think that we kind of skipped that part of songwriting on the first record, and this time we're sort of paying attention to that. I think it's the most fun and happiest we've been since we've started." Now, to my knowledge, the first song from Panic at the Disco's actual upcoming sophomore record, Pretty Odd, which was played live, was the track When the Day Met the Night. Now, here's a clip of them playing an early, slightly different version of the song with a different chorus at Reading Festival 2007. Body couldn't get out, just hanging around, when he fell in love. as you can tell, this song was a lot more positive and sunshiny and laid back and simple than really anything Panic at the Disco had brought to the table musically before, especially compared to It's True Love. This song kind of sounds to me like, I don't know, Third Eye Blind meets the Beatles or something. The band ended up finishing recording Pretty Odd on January 6th of 2008, and I think it's pretty interesting that this album was recorded like right in the middle of winter, right? Because to me, Pretty Odd feels like such a summery album, you know? In the second week of January of 2008, the exclamation point, which had always previously been present in the band name, Panic at the Disco, had been removed. It had been scrubbed from all of their internet pages, like, you know, their MySpace, their Pure Volume, their official website, etc. Fans were kind of like, what the hell? What's going on with this? Where's the exclamation point? And on January 10th of 2008, Rolling Stone had reported the following. In news that is sure to be a relief for copy editors worldwide, a rep for Panic at the Disco has confirmed that the band will hereafter be known as Panic at the Disco. No exclamation point. But wait, their sophomore album will be titled Pretty.Odd. Creative punctuation wins again. Now, for some reason, the news of the removal of the exclamation point was like a huge deal to everybody. The fans of the band were like upset, and people were creating and signing petitions to try to bring the exclamation point back, and the removal of the exclamation point unintentionally ended up becoming a real focal point of the Pretty Odd era as a whole.
You've dropped the exclamation mark. Ah, yes. What's this all about?
You guys caused a bit of controversy recently. Dropping an exclamation mark.
You guys dropped the exclamation point off the end of your band name. Why is that? Are you guys just kind of not as excited about your band anymore?
It is weird how much attention the exclamation point thing got. I mean,
What's with the exclamation mark?
You guys dropped the exclamation mark.
Taking the exclamation mark out of the title.
Yes.
You dropped the exclamation point.
It's missing right now.
Well, at least for me, it got a little bit annoying to try to write that every time you're typing the name, so I don't know. Well, it was never part of the name to us. It just kind of, people started writing it, and then it ended up in more and more things like that. So when we started doing, you know, new promo stuff for this album, we just told everyone, you know, not to use it anymore. So
Because it was never really a big deal to us, but I guess we didn't ever realize how big of a deal it was to other kids or other fans that like that band. So we didn't know it was going to cause such a hype. And then when it did, it was just kind of funny. We were just like a little shocked as to why. Sorry. It was such a huge deal. But it was, you know, hey, you know, what can you do? Yeah. I mean, it's gone. It's gone. You know, it was just the album title had two marks of punctuation, and we just decided
that was enough.
The one with
Three's
the name would be, yeah, exactly.
Three's a crowd.
I think it's pretty funny at this Halloween show that the band played that year. They on stage put a tombstone with the exclamation point on it to allude to its death. Anyways, so freaking Pretty Odd, man. The second official full-length record from American rock and roll group Panic at the Disco was finally officially released on March 21st of 2008, almost 2.5 years since the release of their debut. Pretty Odd was released through Fueled by Ramen as well as Decadence Records, and it was produced by a man named Rob Mathis, who, according to Wikipedia, produces albums for artists like Sting and Rod Stewart. Now, Pretty Odd, in case anyone doesn't know, is, without a doubt, full-on a psychedelic, Baroque pop, 60s-inspired classic rock and roll album. Very overtly inspired by lots of 60s music, but very obviously and overtly inspired by specifically the Beatles.
I wanna go where everyone goes. I wanna know what everyone knows. I wanna go where everyone feels the same.
It's almost kind of like how that band Greta Van Fleet are like basically Led Zeppelin, but they're like not actually Led Zeppelin. Pretty Odd is basically the Beatles, except it's not the Beatles, it's Panic at the Disco. But unlike Greta Van Fleet, it's not, in my opinion, super corny or contrived or, I don't know, kind of disingenuous. Pretty Odd, on the other hand, is surprisingly authentic and very well done. If you're looking for one of the best examples of a psychedelic era Beatles, I won't say rip-off, but maybe emulation, Pretty Odd is definitely the album for you. They knocked it out of the park with whatever, with the concept of what they were going for on this album. And the cool thing about this album as a whole is that even though it's largely a clear Beatles worship album, it's still, at its core, it still does kind of feel like an evolution of Panic at the Disco. Brendan's voice was still signature enough, and Ryan Ross's songwriting style was still distinct enough for it to be able to be embraced by, for example, someone like me, who isn't really a huge Beatles guy at all. I never listened to the Beatles, but I love Pretty Odd. Now, regardless, I gotta say, Pretty Odd, whichever way you want to spin it, was a totally fucking weird-ass album. Pretty odd indeed. It really was pretty freaking odd. This album made, no sense at the time. No matter how good the songs might have been, it was 2008, and nobody in that year, especially a band so rooted in the Warped Tour, emo, fueled by ramen world, were doing anything even remotely similar to, Beatles worship music. That was totally, I could imagine that some people at the label were probably like, guys, I don't know about this album. Definitely, I can't stress enough, one of the strangest albums to come out of the 2000s emo pop-punk explosion as a whole. Not to mention, just the fact of how genuinely freaking good this album is, and how great these songs are, and like I said, how really well done and authentic sounding of a record this is. That just makes it even weirder somehow. Let's get into the songs on the record a little bit, shall we, and the overall vibe of this record. So, the track We're So Starving kicks off the record with the hilariously ironic lyrics of, "You don't have to worry, 'cause we're still the same band," which to me is definitely poking fun at the fact that overall this was nowhere near the same fucking band. Aside from, like I was saying, the fact that, Brendan Urie had a very distinct voice, a completely different sound and style than Fever. 9 in the Afternoon was the lead single off of the album, just an absolutely fantastic, total classic sounding song. Not only are there very obvious tongue-in-cheek metaphors for smoking marijuana, but this was also apparently one of, if not the first song written for the record Pretty Odd after the scrapping of Cricket and Clover. And this was the song that, apparently, according to the band, kind of set the tone for the vibe of the rest of the record, which kind of makes sense when you hear it. So, lyrics like "Back to the room where it all began," "Feeling as good as lovers can," and the overall laid-back, carefree nature of the song definitely, you can tell laid the groundwork for the rest of the songwriting on this album. The track That Green Gentleman was also a single from the record, a fantastic, summery, anthemic, big major key pop song with a big proclamation in the chorus. "Things have changed for me, and that's okay," which was almost like the band's message to the world that, yes, they have changed as people and as musicians, but people are allowed to change, and that's not a bad thing, and you shouldn't worry about it. It's good to change. Embrace it. You don't have to worry. Songs like When the Day Met the Night and the Paul McCartney's Wings-esque Paste Cheval follow That Green Gentleman and 9 in the Afternoon's lead with more of this up-tempo, major key, happy, uplifting, summery pop song vibe, which again was very new for Panic at the Disco. However, all of these summery, poppier songs on the album, in my opinion, kind of share a similar vibe to maybe older Beach Boys stuff, in the sense that underneath the summery pop coat of paint on the outside, these songs also have somewhat of a haunting, almost dark and unsettling subtle undertones to them, you know what I mean? Like if you switched these songs to minor key and made them slow acoustic songs, they'd be absolutely heartbreaking. The lyrics are outwardly positive, yet subtle melancholy flows through it as well, you know what I'm saying? There are also 2 songs written by just Brendan Urie on this record, which were the first 2 Panic songs which he had sole writing credits on. Those songs are I Have Friends in Holy Spaces, as well as the track Folkin' Around. The former sounds like a literal show tune from the 1940s, and the latter is a very, like, almost comedically, authentically well done, straight up folk song. And this is also a pretty good time to mention that unlike A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, which was pretty much written entirely by guitarist Ryan Ross, Pretty Odd was still written mostly by Ryan, but John Walker wrote a lot of the songs for this record. There were a lot more collaborations from the whole band. It was more of a collaborative effort on the writing side than anything that they had done before. But to me, you know, when Ryan Ross was in the band, it was still overall, like, I feel like it was Ryan's vision, you know what I mean? That's just what I feel like. I feel like a lot of people feel the same way, even here on Pretty Odd. There are a couple ballads on the album, like the psychedelic sea shanty, Behind the Sea, which features lead vocals from the beautiful Ryan Ross. I'm so glad that Ryan has, you know, he sings a lot more on this album than he did on Fever, and I absolutely love his voice, and I'm glad that his voice is heard more on this record and on this song, Behind the Sea. And there's another ballad on here, which is the absolutely heart-wrenching Northern Downpour. This song was also released as a single with a great music video, and man, Northern Downpour is a song that it's very hard not to cry when you're listening to it, you know what I'm saying? It's a real tearjerker, beautiful track. Now, the album's trippiest, druggiest, strangest moments, the most psychedelic moments on the album are tracks like The Piano Knows Something I Don't Know, or From a Mountain in the Middle of the Cabins, which, you know, super unorthodox song structures and Bob Dylan-esque lyrics that confidently make no sense, like, for example, toast the fine folks casting silver crumbs to us from the dock, jinxed things ringing as they leak through tiny cracks in the boardwalk, scarecrow, now it's time to hatch sprouting sons and ageless daughters. Alright. The album also has a couple straight up classic, like kind of early Rolling Stones-esque, like vintage rock and roll songs, you know, very 1965 rock and roll tracks like She's a Handsome Woman, which has an absolutely freaking sinister guitar riff right at the beginning, you know, right at the beginning of it, and definitely one of my favorite choruses on this record. She's a Handsome Woman is a great song, as well as the closing track, Mad as Rabbits, which is a beautifully well done song, very urgent, very catchy and attention grabbing. More Ryan Ross lead vocals on this one, and it features more totally oddball lyrics like, and now he drags down miles in America, briefcase in hand, the stove is creeping up his spine again, can't get enough trash. And the rope hung his other branch, and at the end was a dog called Bambi, who was chewing on his parliaments when he tried to save the calendar business. Yeah, bro, feel you, Ryan. Mad as Rabbits then ends with an anthemic, you know, beautiful repeated closing chant of "We must reinvent love," a perfect mission statement and beautiful ending to a beautiful and strange and beautiful album by Panic at the Disco, Pretty Odd. It's a musical journey. It's a strange and beautiful trip. Pretty Odd is, in my opinion. I fucking love this album, man. I love how weird it is. Now, as you can imagine, Pretty Odd received kind of a mixed reaction at first from critics and fans alike. I think that the general consensus from fans was that, you know, people were like, this is a good record. It's great to have new Panic music again and a new record from the band, because at the time it really did feel like a long ass time had passed since the release of, their first album. 2.5 years is a long, long time for, to wait for their mostly teenaged audience. When you're in high school, 2.5 years is like a decade. So people were happy that they were back, but there definitely was this underlying consistent opinion from fans that while the record was well done, a lot of people criticized the band for changing too much. A lot of people really missed the older, more pop-punk scene adjacent Panic, which, we had known them for on Fever, or whatever band they were on Fever. You can't really call them a straight-up pop-punk band on that record. People missed their old sound, I saw a comment recently on a YouTube video of a live full set of Panic on the Pretty Odd tour, which said, "This is a cottagecore lesbians only event," which is not only totally hilarious, but also definitely speaks to how niche the audience of this album can tend to be, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of fans were also just straight up, confused by the album more than anything, which is totally understandable. It's a confusing album. Spin Magazine gave the album a good review, saying, quote, "Pretty Odd lives up to its title because it dares to be optimistically beautiful at a time when sadness and ugliness might have won them easier credibility." Time Magazine claimed that, quote, "Where this band goes now is unclear, but the journey is a lot more interesting." Blender Magazine said that several songs on the record were, quote, "a brush with greatness." Now, the heavy Beatles influence on the record was criticized by some publications. For example, Mojo Magazine claims that the album is too clinical and calculated considering the young age of the band members. Q Magazine said that ultimately, you're left wishing that Panic at the Disco had more to say about their own generation instead of mimicking that of their parents, which I totally agree with. The Boston Globe claimed that, quote, "Pretty borrows liberally from the things that made those bands superficially interesting, the practice eccentricity, the constant innovation, without paying tribute to the cultural and political sensibilities that made them great." A fair point. However, a year after the record was released in 2009, James Montgomery of MTV News said that the record was overlooked and claimed, quote, "Give this one a decade. We could have another Pinkerton on our hands." I do have to say, personally, I love Pretty Odd, and I think these are truly great songs. It's such a whimsical, fun, interesting, strange journey of a record. And I'm personally, for whatever reason, I'm not put off by or in distaste of the fact that this album is a total Beatles worship album, despite, like I was saying, not really being a huge Beatles guy at all myself. But the one thing I do have a problem with not necessarily even the record Pretty Odd, but more just Panic at the Disco in this time as a whole, is the overall fact that there was such a big jump, such a big drastic change in sound and style between Fever and Pretty Odd, and there was nothing to really bridge that gap, you know what I mean? The shelved Cricket and Clover album, I think totally would have been a perfect bridge to that gap based on, the songs I've heard from it, and something in the middle of these two releases to connect the two, I think would have really helped out the overall Panic at the Disco story and trajectory up to that point. It's always frustrating whenever a band takes a complete 180 turn in their sound like Panic did on Pretty Odd, especially with it being their second record and second overall release. And, Pretty Odd feels way more like a new beginning as opposed to an actual continuation of or a real evolution of the sound that they had on Fever. I really wish that they had, at least put out the songs on Cricket and Clover as like an EP or something in summer of 2007, and then put out Pretty Odd, in 2008 as planned. And overall, I think a lot of you guys can definitely agree with me that I really just wish that there was more Ryan Ross era Panic music in general. And while I love Pretty Odd, I wouldn't mind if we had gotten more of the Fever era sound on like an EP or something, or, songs like It's True Love and Nearly Witches on an EP in the middle of Fever and Pretty Odd. That would have just been perfect, in my opinion. But it is what it is. You can't go back and change the past, so we gotta live with what we got, I guess, which is a Fever you can't sweat out, and pretty odd. So, sales-wise, and keep in mind, this was around the time of the, the recession, the economy crash, as well as declining CD sales in general due to the internet and peer-to-peer file-sharing websites and early streaming sites like Rhapsody and Napster on the rise, and reiterating, but this album was obviously a total left turn musically, so a lot of things were at play here when it came to the, the sales and charting history of this album and whatever. But sales-wise, pretty odd, debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 with first day sales of 54,000 copies and first week sales of 139,000 copies. This was their largest sales week to date at that point, beating their previous record when Fever sold 45,000 copies within a week span during the winter of 2006. To put the first week sales into some perspective, Pretty Odd again sold 139,000 copies, while Fall Out Boy's Infinity on High reached first week sales of 260,000 copies a year prior. Pretty Odd ended up reaching gold status in June of 2008 with sales of 500,000 copies, pretty good. Now, although sales were high and the album was technically definitely a success, it overall failed to reach or match the sales heights of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, which had, that record had gone platinum within a year of release. Pretty Odd eventually did hit platinum status with sales hitting 1 million copies 11 years later in 2019, actually, following the mainstream resurgence of Panic at the Disco, following the success of smash hit radio singles like High Hopes in 2018. So, real quick, let's talk about the touring that the band did in support of the Pretty Odd album, shall we? There were 2 big headlining tours in support of this album, the first one being the 2008 Honda Civic Tour, which took place from April through July of 2008 across North America, with support from opening acts Motion City Soundtrack, The Hush Sound, and Phantom Planet. I actually got to see them on this tour way back in the day, and it was awesome, as you can imagine. The second one was on the Rock Band Live Tour. What is it with, these corporate tour names, man? The Rock Band Live Tour, promoting the video game Rock Band 2 from October to November of 2008 with Dashboard Confessional, The Plain White Tees, and The Cab, a very cool tour. And, of course, there were some festival dates, a little Bamboozle here, a little Glastonbury there, you know how it goes. And in April of 2009, the band played again with the corporate tour and festival names, the My Coke Festival in Cape Town of South Africa, which is pretty cool. Now, guys, y'all ready to freak out with me? Y'all want to know what the biggest scene freak out of 2009 was? People were up in arms about this, man, and how long has it been since 2009? 11 years. People are still up in arms about this. Y'all probably know what I'm getting at. On July 6th of 2009, hearts everywhere were broken when Ryan Ross and John Walker posted this message onto the band's website and their MySpace page. To whom this may concern, Ryan Ross and John Walker will be leaving Panic at the Disco to embark on a musical excursion of their own. Though the 4 of us have made music together in the past, we've creatively evolved in different directions which have compromised what each of us want to personally achieve. Over the years, we have remained close and honest with each other, which helped us to realize that our goals were different and that parting ways is truly what is best for each of us. We are all excited for the future. You should be too. Ryan and John. Stay posted to the Panic site for updates on Ryan and John's new project, as well as a message from Brendan and Spencer, who will continue on as Panic at the Disco. All touring and album plans for Panic will continue as previously announced.